All right, first things first, we need to clarify a few things. So when we created a big structure in the HTML 101 course, and let's just change this over from plain text to HTML. And by the way, I'm using VS Code. If you're using a different editor, all I did was go to File, which is just outside of my recording area, and then New File. So Command N or Control N will create a new file for you. And it automatically thought it was a plain text file, so I clicked down here where it used to say plain text, typed in HTML, and selected HTML. And that just gives us nice little goodies like this. We can do HTML:5, hit Tab for autocomplete using VS Code, and it gives us a bunch of stuff in here. So I'm going to actually go ahead and delete some of this, and I'm going to call this HTML201. Now, we learned at some point that we have a paragraph, we could put some lorem ipsum in there, and we could say, for instance, that this should be underlined. Something like that. Now, if I save this as, let's go in here and name this index.html. And I just saved that into a particular folder that I had called HTML201, and I called it index.html. But if I open up Google Chrome or any sort of browser, whichever your favorite browser is, you can go to File and then Open File. So Control O or Command O. Go to my folder here and let's just open this up. And we can see that this, once I zoom in, is underlined. And that's cool, it does what we want, but unfortunately underline is deprecated. So it was okay to learn this a little while ago just because we needed to make that underline, but there's a better way to do this. And the better way to do this would probably be to add a span in here. Let's go ahead and change this to a span element. And all this is a simple inline element. And you should be familiar with block elements versus inline elements at this point. And what we're going to do is work with this style attribute. And this style attribute allows us to write CSS. So you don't need to actually know too much CSS right now, but if you want underline, I would say maybe try to memorize this particular one. I tell people all the time, you don't need to memorize too much. I mean, you can always Google it, how to add underline using CSS. That'll work as well. So I'm going to do text dash decoration colon space underline. Now, if I save that, go back to my page and refresh, it should look like nothing changed. And that's perfect. And I can always check by right-clicking and clicking inspect, and you can see in my inspect tool down here that there is in fact a span with text decoration underline, and if I wanted to, I can actually toggle that on and off now, which is really, really nice. So moving forward, whenever we use underlines, let's go ahead and use text decoration underline instead of using the U element. Just because the U element is deprecated, it's from old versions of HTML, and CSS can now do this. And we prefer to use CSS whenever we can. Okay, let's take a look at internal links. So actually, let's recap first. So how do we create a link? We create a link, and I'll make this just a touch bigger here. We create a link with the A anchor at element and the href attribute, and that could go to http website.com, go to website.com, and this is just going to show us a little link up here, and it's going to go to website.com, whatever is on that site. So that's how we create a link. But what if we wanted to link to something else in the page? So let's go ahead and actually make this page look a little nicer. So let's say h1 welcome to HTML 201. And let's create a link. And we don't know what this link is going to be yet, but we know it's going to say, scroll to bottom of page. And we can get rid of this one because that's not necessary anymore. That was just an example. So now when I do this, I click scroll to bottom of page and it does nothing. It's because it's going nowhere. You can see that there's no href in there. There's no hyperlink reference. So let's say we have this really, really long page, and let's go ahead and copy this a bunch of times. And I don't really care too much about the formatting at this moment. I just want the page to scroll like this. And I want, when we click the link, to go to the bottom of the page and maybe have a link at the bottom of the page to bring us back up to the top. So let's do that. Let's say there's going to be, let's say like an H3, and we're going to give this an ID. And this is a unique identifier for this element. So it should never have two of the same ID in the same page. So let's call this bottom, and this is the bottom of the page. And when I refresh, you can see it just says the bottom of the page. Nothing happened. The ID didn't do anything particular. But if we go back up to our link, we can actually type in $ID. Now, whatever that ID is going to be. Now, that ID that we wrote was bottom. Go down here, ID is equal to bottom. Save that, and I'm just going to refresh up here. And you can see my link actually changed color. And you can actually see it says index.html, bottom. And when I click this, boom, it brings me to the bottom. So it doesn't do a smooth scroll, but it does jump me to the very bottom of the page, which is actually quite important for long content pages. Now let's go ahead and create a link to bring us back up to the top. So maybe let's remove this as an H3 and let's make this a little more hidden. Let's create a div in here. And you can see we're going to be getting a little more advanced with this. ID is equal to bottom, but we know IDs can or should be completely unique. So let's go ahead and get rid of this one. We can actually get rid of that whole line. And let's put a link in here that's going to go back up to the top. Back to top. Now, because this is an internal link, this needs an ID somewhere on the page called top. So let's scroll back up to our code here and let's give this an ID of top. And let's refresh our page and give this a shot. And that zoomed way out for me. I want to zoom back in. And this should scroll me all the way to the bottom. Boom, just like that. Or not scroll, but jump me to the bottom. And this should jump me back up to the top. Just like that. So now we have internal links. What I would like you to do is create a page that's long enough that you actually create a scroll bar here. Or what I did was, because this page actually wasn't very long, you can always just open up your inspect tool. And if you shrink it, or if you bring it up high enough, it'll sort of shrink your viewport. And you'll have a scroll bar and you can test it out that way, like this. Go ahead and give that a shot. Once you're ready, let's head on over to that next lesson. Let's take a look at favicons. Favicons are these little icons that show up right next to your page title. Now, we don't actually have a favicon set. We have a title, which is cool, but what if we want something a little bit custom? We can actually add that as well. We can customize it to be whatever we want. Now, typically, it should be an image that's 32 pixels by 32 pixels, so it's pretty small. I'm not exactly going to follow that rule because I know it's going to shrink it down, but if you want it to be properly sized, maybe have proper translucency or transparency or anything like that, then yeah, you're going to want a 32 by 32 image, but I'm just going to use a random image that I have from the Coding for Everybody branding. So let's open up our code here. And in our head, what we're going to create is the link element. And we can do link : favicon. And it gives us all sorts of stuff in here. Now, by default, it wants us to use a .ico. That's an older format. We don't have to do that. We can use, let's say, a .png. Now, this is just like linking to an image or a CSS or a JavaScript file. We actually need to make sure that this works. And you'll notice that we're using 3 attributes here. So we've got the link element, we've got the rel, or the relation, like what is it? It's a shortcut and it's an icon. A hyperlink reference to wherever that image is going to be, and then the image type. Now, we don't want the image type to be X icon, we want the image type to be PNG because I'm going to be using a PNG. Likewise, if you're using a JPEG, it would be JPEG, alternatively JPEG with an E, but we're using PNG. Now, it's at this point, I might actually want to use my editor a little bit more. So what I would like to do is, instead of just having one file open, I'm going to open this whole folder. I'm going to go File, Open. I'm going to go to my desktop where this folder is, and I only have index.html in there. Let's go ahead and open that. And it really looks like it didn't do a whole lot, except added this Explore bar. Now, if that Explore bar does not show up, you can always go to, where are you? It's somewhere in here. View, Explorer, right there. View Explorer, that'll always turn it on for you. So let's click index.html, and this is just the page that I was working on. And in here, I also want some sort of image to link to. So I'm going to open up my Finder. I'm going to copy this particular image. I came prepared to this lesson with an image called Coding for Everybody favicon.png. I'm just going to copy that entire name. And you can see as I copied it into that folder, VS Code was like, oh, there's a new file. Okay, let's put that in there as well. Now we can preview it. So this is what the image is going to look like. And all I have to do is, because I copied that file name, I'm just going to paste that file name. And we're not using slashes or dot dots or anything like that. We're not using this or, let's say, favicons. We're not doing anything like that. We want to make sure this is in the same folder as our index.html, just to keep this simple for now. And you can tell it's in the same folder because we're in the HTML201 folder over here, and there's index.html and coding for everybody favicon.png. Let's go ahead and save this. And let's refresh this page. And you can see that favicon now showed up. Now, if you're using another browser and it does not show up, that could be because of one of two reasons. There's a typo, and you haven't actually added the image properly. I'll show you how to debug that in just a second. Or there is caching, and I know browsers like Microsoft Edge like to cache pretty hard, so you might actually have to do a hard reload or open up another browser, just because your browser is going to try to get this image once and then try to cache it for a very, very long time. Now, if this doesn't show up for you, let's go ahead and do this. QWERTY doesn't show up in there, and you can actually see with my inspect tools open, there's one error. If I go over to my console, you can see network error file not found, and it's looking for QWERTY coding for everybody favicon .png. And that just simply does not exist. So if you open up your inspect tools and there's a typo in there or the file doesn't exist, you'll see the error right there. And I'm just going to undo that. And there we go. We have a favicon. So if you're following along with me, what I would like you to do is find a small little image, something like this, and add it as your favicon to the page that you're working on. All right, let's talk about something that's kind of complex and kind of tricky, because this one is going to trick a lot of people for a very long time, including myself. And I'm talking about pathing. So we've put everything into one particular folder right now, but what if we wanted another folder? What if we wanted to move our favicon into a folder called images/favicons? And we could just click and drag that right in there. And so we've got a folder in here called images, and then another folder called favicons, and then a file in here called coding for everybody. So in that last lesson, we created a favicon. But when I refresh the page, we're going to see that we get that error file not found. It does not exist because it's not in that same folder anymore. It's not in the same folder as index.html. But what we can do is we can say, go to the images folder / the favicons folder / and then our file name. So let's go ahead and save this, or refresh anyways, and yeah, that shows up for us. So that's pathing. That's how we get into a path. So we just said folder name / another folder name. And by the way, don't use spaces. I know a lot of Windows users like to use spaces, but in things like this, do not / use spaces. It's a lot easier if you use underscores or dashes, but please don't use spaces. You're going to run into a lot of problems. So folder name / folder name / and then the file name. Simple as that. Now let's go ahead and add an image into just the images folder here. Not the favicons folder, but just the images. So let's go ahead and go to unsplash.com and let's get an image of a computer because we're working on computers. Good enough. And let's download this one for free. Let's get the small version of this one because that's all we need. I would like to say thank you to Glenn Karstens Peters. This is a sweet photo. Thanks for letting me use it. Let's go ahead and show this in the Finder. And I'm going to open this up. I'm just copying this file. Let's go ahead and throw this into here. And I'm going to rename this to computer.jpg. And in my editor, you can actually see this turned into a proper folder now. And now there's subfolders in here. But in images, I've got a folder called favicons and a folder, or not a folder, but an image, a file called computer.jpg. Now, I'm going to get rid of a bunch of these P elements because, well, we don't really need them. And we're going to make this page long anyway, so that internal link to the top and the bottom of the page is going to work perfectly fine. Eventually. Probably not right now because the page is kind of short. But let's go ahead and add an image. And that src is going to be images. That's the folder name. And then the file name is computer.jpg. Let's give it an alt, computer, and that's it. So if we go back to our page and we refresh, we can see this image shows up now. and that's in the images folder. Now, again, if that doesn't work for you, let's just make sure that you always have things typed properly. It is case sensitive. So if your folder is called images lowercase, do not write images uppercase. That's just not going to work for you. So let's do images break me, and let's refresh. We can see the alt text shows up there, and in my console, you can actually see error not found. So that's pathing into a folder. Now let's say someone goes into the images folder, because we can do this. We know that HTML 201 is a folder. We also know that images is a folder. So let's do this. Let's go to /images. And we can actually see that we have favicons, a folder, and we have computer.jpg. But let's say we actually wanted something to show up here. What we can do is go into our images folder, create a new file. We want to call this index.html, and that just means use this page by default. This is the default page that your browser is going to look for, so even if you don't land on this page, it's going to try to use this page anyways, just by default. My VS Code is set up to use Django templates by default, but let's change that to HTML5. And let's do HTML:5. Images folder is going to be the title name, and in the body, let's just say, hi. All right, so I just refreshed the page there. We have this index.html file, and it's not showing our page by default, but this is a good practice because once it gets onto a server, index.html is going to be the page that shows up by default. So it's going to look just like you clicked into it, just like this, but it's not necessarily going to say index.html. That's not a thing you need to really remember at this point in time, but it is a cool little thing that you can do with live servers, live websites down the road. So now we have this index.html file in our images folder. Let's link up a page. So let's say H3, this is the images folder, and let's create a link in here, an anchor link with a hypertext reference. And we're going to use a relative page. So we're going to say go up one folder, and that's how we do that. We go ... up one folder. If we needed to go up one more folder, because this is already in the images folder, we need it to be outside. We could do ... slash ... Every one of these you can actually see is going up a folder in my computer. Now I don't want any of that. I just want up one, and I want to be able to select not the images folder, but index.html, and that's going to be referencing this one here. The naming gets a little bit confusing because we have two index.html files, but that's okay. And VS Code was smart enough to figure out what we were trying to do. Go back home is what I'm going to say in there. Let's refresh this page. Let's make this just a bit bigger. And we can go back home, and when I click it, it goes back to the HTML 201 homepage. So that's pathing in a nutshell. To move up a folder, use ... To move into a folder, you don't use the ... You just specify the folder name / subfolder name, if there is one, / and then your file name. And that is pathing in a nutshell. Okay, let's take a look at tables. Tables are wildly important to us right now because they're going to enable us to actually create some sort of layout for our page. Now, admittedly, layouts aren't really created with tables anymore. This is a very old way of doing things, but because we don't know CSS and we don't know JavaScript yet, this is the only way that we have. And that is 100% acceptable because even though we're going to be using tables in a way that's not really used anymore, we are going to be learning all about how to use tables properly because they're still used for things like feature sets or pretty much any government website because they all still use tables for some reason. Yeah, so tables are still used. Emails use tables all the time. It's a really important skill to have. So I'm going to go down here, and in this lesson, I'm just going to show you how a table is created, but we're not actually going to do anything with it yet. So don't feel like you have to code along with me. So a table is a table element, just like this. And inside of this, we have table rows called TRs, or I can do TR and then tab. We can have another table row, TR tab. And then inside of each table row, the cells are called table cells, or TDs, table data cells. Cell 1. And let's go in here and do TD. Cell 2. And by the way, if you're sort of just new to this course and I'm going a little too fast for you, what I did there was I could type in table, and because it's an HTML element, I can type in table, and as soon as I see that Emmet abbreviation, I can hit the tab key on my keyboard, and it just creates it into HTML elements for me. So now we're getting into some nice nesting, and in HTML 101, we learned all about nesting. So we know that this whole thing is going to be a table, including the child and grandchild elements. This whole thing is a row, including its child element, and this single element here is going to be a cell. And this one is going to be cell 2. And if we just refresh our page here, scroll on down, we can see cell 1, cell 2. Nothing fancy really happening there. It doesn't look like anything's happened, but what if we give this a border of 1? We now actually have a table. We can do more with this too. We can say the width is going to be 100%. And it takes up the whole thing. We could add another cell. And this one's going to be cell 1.2, I guess. And we could add cell 1.3. And we can go up, so on and so on. So anyways, we're going to get into this in much more depth in the next couple of lessons, but I just wanted to quickly show you that this is how we create a table. Let's take a look at table, rows, and cells. So to create a table, we do this, table/table. And that is all we really need to do to create a table. But inside of a table consists of two primary elements, a table row, and that's what TR stands for. TR is equal to a table row. And inside of each row, we have cells, or table data cells. So a TD is equal to a table data cell. And so let's do TD tab, and let's create our first cell. First cell here. Now let's flip on over to our browser and just hit refresh. We're going to see our first cell. We can't actually see it. We can inspect it if we wanted to. And we can see that we are in fact in a table, and our browser is smart enough to say, hey, there's actually supposed to be a body here. So wrap the TRs in a T body. So this actually goes one level deeper. So it goes table, T body, TR, TD. Now I don't have to write the T body because I'm assuming that everything that I'm writing is going to be in the table body anyways, and the browser is making that same assumption. So we can shortcut it that way. Now to see our progress, I always like to throw a border on here and then just get rid of that border later. So let's do a border of 1 and a width of 100%. Let's refresh, and now we can see we have our first cell. And if we go ahead and add a second cell, this is going to be side by side, which is something we weren't able to achieve with block elements in HTML 101, but now we can. And we can keep doing this, so on and so on. So instead of second cell, we could do third cell, and we can keep adding more and more and more. Now I'm going to get rid of that third cell. I'm going to copy this whole thing over. Actually, I'm not going to copy it. Let's write this out by hand because this is good practice to write this out by hand. TD, row 2, cell 1. And if I do another TD, hit tab, row 2, cell 2. And there we go. We have first cell, second cell, row 2, cell 1, row 2, cell 2. And that's how we create table, rows, and cells. Now, what I would like you to do is give this a shot. I want you to create a 2x2 table. Create 4 cells, so you have 2 rows, 2 columns, and 4 cells in total. Go ahead and give that a shot. Once you're ready, let's head on over to that next lesson where we dive a little bit more into tables. Let's take a look at merging cells and rows. So this gets really, really interesting, and it's not actually super intuitive at first, but it gets a little easier the more you do it. So in the last lesson, we created a 2x2 table, 2 rows, 2 columns. In this one, we want to create a 3x3. So I'm going to do a table here, and I want to see my border. I want to see my progress here. And I'm going to change that width to 100% because I want it to take up as much space on my page as possible. I don't really want to leave any extra space off to the right. Now, for good measure, we could always do a T body if we wanted to. I didn't do that in the last lesson. I talked about it, didn't do it. That's okay. I'm going to do it this time just to show you that we can do it. So we've got a table row here. We know that this is going to be our first table row. Second row, third row. And all I'm doing is hashing this out. I'm roughing this out. I'm making it a little bit easier to work with. And now I need, because I have 3 rows and I need 3 columns, let's go ahead and create TD, 1, 2. And all I'm doing here to copy the whole row is Command C, Command V, or Control C, Control V. And I'm going to select all of that, copy that, paste it, and paste it in there. So let's go ahead and take a look at what our table now looks like. We've got row 1, row 2, row 3. or actually those are columns. I got that backwards. So column 1, column 2, column 3, row 1, row 2, row 3. Now, there's a way to merge cells together, and we can do this actually in a very interesting way. We can do col span, so column span is equal to 3. So we have to take a look here. How many columns do we have? 1, 2, 3. We can span 3 columns. But let's go ahead and save this and see what happens. This number 1 in row 1 takes up 3 spaces, but now there's 2 more cells in here. Now, if you ever see something like that, you can safely delete those extra cells because they're not needed. We said col span of 3, so take up 3 column widths. And then we also had some old HTML in there, and we just got rid of that. When we refresh our page, we're going to see that row 1 takes up 3 columns now. Now let's go ahead and merge this 1 and this 2 together. No, let's not do that. Let's do this 2 and this 3. So we need to go down to row 2. So we've got row 1 here. Let's do row 2. And we want to merge these 2 together. So we can say col span is equal to 2 because we want this to take up all of number 2 and all of number 3. Let's go ahead and save that, refresh, and now it's taking up that extra spacing as well. Now let's go ahead and merge this 1, so row 2 cell 1 and row 3 cell 1. Let's go ahead and merge those together. So we can actually merge pieces of rows together as well. So in here, because we want to merge downwards, let's do a row span of 2. And let's see what this looks like if I don't adjust this. You can see it displaced another cell, which is not what we want. So we still have 1, 2, and 3 in row 3, and we don't want that. Let's go ahead and just delete that row 1 because we've got a 1 here, and we have a 1 here. We don't need both of them. Let's just delete this one. So delete, save, go back to our browser, refresh, and look at that. So we've got 3 column widths in our first row. Over here, we've got 2 column widths. In here, we have 2 row heights. And we do that with these attributes called row span and col span or column span. Now, this is going to be really important to your final project. So what I would like you to do is give this a shot. Do exactly what I did. Create a 3x3 table and then start merging rows and cells together and see how it displaces cells, and then try to delete the proper cells and just make it actually work the way you want it to work. Go ahead, give that a shot. If you get stuck, don't forget you can always ask questions down below or in the Facebook group called Learning to Code. There's over 56,000 members. We can help you within just a few minutes of posting a question. Go ahead, give that a shot, and I'll see you in the next lesson.